We've been going through the book of Corinthians, 1 Corinthians to be exact. We'll do 2 Corinthians next because that's how numbers work. Corinthians is a quick recap. The city of Corinth is insane, okay? It's super pagan. 26 different temples in the city to various gods. It's super sexualized. Weird temple on the hill to Aphrodite. Prostitutes come down every night, and it was like normal behavior to, entertain them. That's going on at the time and at the place. You have the temple of Apollos in the town, which was dealing with children and sexuality, which is creepy and weird, but that was accepted. Corinth was so bad that they made a verb up to Corinthanize as a way to describe somebody who is so debauched and weird that they've been Corinthanized. That was a Greek thing, and so that's the city then that the church of Corinth, Corinthians, sits in. And that's who Paul is writing to. So last week then, we talked about how his first point of business when he starts to interact with his church is having all kinds of weird issues inside of it, is not to immediately jump into the weird issues, but to jump into what he feels is the biggest problem, which was division. So he talks about some of you are saying you follow Paul, some of you are saying you follow Peter, some of you say you're following Apollos, but what I tell you is we all follow who? Jesus. And so that's the point he makes. And then this week, he will pick right up where he ends last week. We'll pick right up because that's, again, how numbers work. And we'll continue to drive the point home of what does it mean then if we follow Jesus. That's what he's going to get at. So verse 18 says, "For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart." So folly, if you don't use that word ever, because I don't, means foolishness or dumb. So the word of the cross is dumb to those who are perishing. That is how he starts out. Because again, Paul likes to influence people and say things that are seeker-friendly so people show up to listen to him. Not so much true. Essentially, what he is saying is, if you're not a believer, the idea of the cross is stupid. Which is true in the world we live in today still. Like, that's not a new thing, right? Christians get made fun of all the time for believing in Sky Daddy. They've made up spaghetti monster that we're supposed to worship. All of these crazy things that this world's come up with to mock Christianity. Zombie Jesus, that's a popular one, right? He walks around because he came back from the dead, so obviously he's a zombie. All that stupid stuff that is out there. So it would make sense when you look at it that they would start to question and maybe view it as strange. We don't. So to unbelievers, to people who don't support the cross, the whole thing seems stupid. But if you're a believer, it suddenly becomes this thing that you're like vehemently passionate about and you're willing to die for. Like, I've seen grown motorcycle riding scary dudes. Like, not dudes that you're like, oh, I'd mess with that guy. Big old tattoo on their head, like freaky looking guys standing at an altar and weep at the idea of the cross. So what is it? When it says that the word of the cross is foolish, he doesn't really tell us what the word of the cross is. So before we go much further, because I don't want to leave you in the dark, we probably should talk about what is the word of the cross. Well, first, you got to accept some things to understand what the cross accomplishes. So first, we're all sinners. This is not a thing anybody questions. Because remember, this world's all messed up in its worldviews. We'll get there in a minute. But we got all kinds of weird things going on. But most people will accept that people can do things that are evil. The fight comes and the problem comes when what actually are the things that are evil. But most people will accept the idea of good and the idea of evil. Now, you can't ask the question why, right? Because people freak out. But there is something to be said that if you believe that there is good and evil, you should wonder why. Why do we believe that there are things that are good? Why do we believe things are bad? But we do. So that's the first thing, though. You got to accept as sinning. So what is sinning? Well, sinning is if God created you with a perfect design and what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to live, and that's true in all aspects of your life. Everything, your work, your marriage, how you raise your kids, how you interact with people, your sexuality. There's a right way to do that. There's a thing that's for. Pastor Pat, that's crazy. No, it's not. Because think about, there's a myriad of things in this world that we say that's what this thing is for, and you don't use something else. If you ever had a dad growing up who was working on an engine, and he would just yell tools out at you, and you had no idea what the tools were, but it felt like he thought you should know, but he never told you, and then he goes, get me a Phillips head screwdriver, and then you just stand over the top of this toolbox and go, oh, no. And then you're just handing him things with him getting madder and madder because he's like, that's not a Phillips head. That's a wrench. Are you stupid? What are you? Same thing, right? That is dumb because there are certain tools made for certain things. Now, you can make other stuff work, but, you can hammer a nail in with a wrench, but that's not the right way to do it, and that's not the smart way to do it. Well, the same is then true about how you live and how you interact. And all sin is when you try to make something do something it's not supposed to be doing in light of a God who tells you how to do it. So we all believe that. That's what Christians believe. Now, to some people in this world, that one itself, they don't like that. They don't like that idea. The bad part about sin is it condemns you to death. Because, see, where God is, there can't be sin because God is completely good or righteous. So if you sin, then you can't be where God is. So there has to be some sort of fix for sin, otherwise God's not what? Good. He's not good and nice if he creates you with the ability to choose, and then you choose poorly, and then now there's no way for you to fix anything. So because he's good, he gives us a way to fix sin, which is Jesus. Now listen, Jesus doesn't just pop onto the scene and just randomly do things, and then that's what makes, okay, we're good because Jesus just showed up. He could have, because he's God. He could have done that. But Jesus works within the confines of the Old Testament law, which reveals what sin is, so that you can be free from sin. That's the cross. So the word of the cross, when it says, for some people it's foolish and some people it's not, is the word of the cross is that you are not a slave to your sin. You don't have to be the thing that you are, which for Christians is liberating, right? We live in a world where people are lonely, angry, depressed, full of anxiety, full of fear and worry. We take all kinds of medications to make ourselves happy and to make ourselves feel right about who we are. When the truth of the matter is, until you get yourself right with God, you're probably always going to feel a little bit of dissonance inside of who you are because you're made to be one thing and you're not being that thing. Why do you feel guilt about something? Why do you have to argue with everybody that what you're doing is okay? Why do you have to scream, tolerate me, if you don't, on some level, feel like what you're doing is intolerant? Like, that's a thing we need to work through. You can't just say things and then not have your ideology be compared to what it is that you're saying. Like, this thing has to work. So inside of all of us, there is this thing that we want to feel a certain way, but if you remove God, then you don't really have a barometer for why you want to feel that way. I want to be happy. Well, what is happy? I don't know, but I want it. I'm not it right now, and I want to be it, and I can't figure out how to be it. And what the cross says is, come to me, all who are heavy laden, all of you carrying the weight of all of this stuff you've done, all of this guilt, and lay it down, and I will give you something that's easy to carry, which is Jesus. He's going to take your broken consciousness, the thing inside your head that wants to lead you down paths of dumbness. He's going to take that thing and give you his mind. He's going to make you righteous. That's what he's going to do. So that's the cross. But to the world, they don't like that. Right? If you say people came back from the dead, that irritates people. I don't know why. Listen, when you talk about Jesus and his resurrection, the whole thing hinges upon that. He has to die and resurrect for there to be freedom from sin. He has to be fully God and fully man. He has to become a perfect sacrifice. He has to be born of a virgin. These things have to be true. And you go, but Pastor Pat, that's not how the natural world works. Which is a hint at one of the first worldviews that influences the way we see the world. There's this naturalistic idea that the world is just a giant machine and we're all just gears in the machine and we have to do the thing that the gear does and you can't ever be any more than what you are in the machine. That's so dark. That's so dark and hopeless. It's fine if you view it like, oh, well, we can make ourselves better and we can rise above, but what you're really saying is, no, you can't. There is no right. There is no wrong. There's just gears in a machine. And we're just doing what we want. And so when you come along and say, hey, there was this man who was fully God and fully man who came to earth and he died and resurrected from the dead, people that believe that the world is just a bunch of cogs, they go, the world doesn't work that way. Nothing else has come back from the dead. So you're saying just one time in history. Right. And if you're sitting there going, how can you be articulate? How can you talk? How can you be emphatic and believe that? Well, here's how. Why are we here? Right? Everything that happens has a cause. Everything has to have a beginning. Everything has to have a moment that causes something to be here. The church, Christianity, is the largest religion in the world, and we have to ask the question, why? So either you get what you get back to is you go all the way back to the beginning of this thing and you come up with some strange conspiracy, like there's some cabal of weirdos trying to manipulate everybody, and that's where it comes from, or you believe that what it actually teaches is what's true. Now, the problem with the cabal of weirdos is the early church, up until about 400 AD, has no established hierarchy that could control anything because they were systematically being killed and persecuted. Like they killed all the leaders, and we're still here. And when you go back into history and you start looking at archaeological evidence for what we have recorded about church history, both biblically and the churches that grew, they're still teaching the same thing we're teaching today. Which points to there had to be some event that occurred that makes us believe the thing that we believe. And that thing, whether you like it or not, is probably the resurrection of the dead. It's probably what took place and what happened. So they don't like that. Here's the next one that we don't like. We don't like the idea, they don't like the idea that people can change who they are. That's not true, Pastor Pat. We're all very tolerant, and we love that people can be who they are. That's not what I said. We do love when people can be who they are. That is the world we live in. We are super tolerant. Everything's okay. Do whatever you want as long as you don't bother me. Everything's okay under the sun, except if I question what you're doing. Then that's not okay. Then you're being intolerant. We're not going to tolerate your intolerance. Aren't you being intolerant by not tolerating? I'm confused on these words. We don't like the idea that we can say people can change. Lepers don't change their spots. They are who they are. No one's ever going to be any different. Christianity is vehemently opposed to that. Stands directly in opposition to that idea. And there are people in this world who don't like that. They don't like the idea that there might be freedom from the things that they are doing, and they don't like the idea that an oppressor can somehow get a get-out-of-jail-free card. And so they don't like it. So whenever you start preaching cross, you start talking about cross, and it's not about these deep words and these deep ideas, and it's just about, hey, Jesus loves you no matter what, and you can get free from your things you've done. They don't like that. Right? That's the last thing that the world doesn't like. People should pay the price for the stuff they've done. You got to be who you are. You got to sit in your mess. Well, I don't know if that's true, Pat. I mean, they don't seem to. It is that way. It is. If you're an alcoholic, you're always an alcoholic. If you're a drug addict, you're always a drug addict. If you're a philanderer, always a philanderer. If you're addicted to pornography, that's who you are. You got weird sexuality issues, that's who you are. Like, all of these things are just things that you are, and you can't fix those things, and you shouldn't want to fix those things because that's just who you are. But the problem is, those things make people feel like garbage. Those things make people feel guilty. Those things make people feel like they wish they weren't those things. Those things lead to depression and anxiety. Those things have led to a weird obsession with suicide in our culture. I can't fix it, so I might as well end it. Well, that's hopeless. So that's why we preach cross, and that's why we teach cross. But they don't like it, because the truth of the matter is, all of these things out there where people think they're so smart and they've got it all figured out, they don't work. They don't work, and we're not supposed to say that. We're supposed to pretend like humanity is the apex of creation, and we can figure it all out if we're left to our own devices. But the truth of the matter is, we haven't figured out anything. We're barely above the animal kingdom when you look back at human history. It's been pretty rough to get to where we are today. There's been wars, rumors of wars, people dying, not taking care of each other, selfishness, greed. It's not good. And anybody that wants to look at it and go, that's now how it all is wrong. It's just wrong. You just can't look at where we're at and go, oh, it's perfect. I love it. Paul knows that when he continues in Scripture. Verse 20 says, where is the one who's wise? Where's the scribe? Where's the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish this wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs, Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God, for the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. Our world likes to pretend they've got it all figured out. Modern philosophy, which comes out of modern academia, has come to the conclusion that we should all be postmodern relativists. Now, if you're like, Pastor Pat, my brain just shut off, my eyes roll back on my head, and I just want to eat a donut and go home. buckle in. Here's what postmodernism is. It comes out of, it's a late 20th century style and concept in the arts, architecture specifically. And criticism that represents a departure from modernism has at heart a general distrust. This is the important part. It has at heart a general distrust of grand theories and ideologies, as well as a problematic relationship with any notion of art. So anything that is an underlying truth within the field of art, it would reject. You always have to build a house this way. No, I don't. Paintings always have to look like this. No, it don't. There's a famous postmodern painting which is just a white canvas. And you may go, and if you're not an artist, you may go like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done. He didn't ever paint anything, except he wrote a thesis about the point that he was making was that the notion that you have to put paint on the canvas is an ideology that we reject as postmodern thinkers. So just because you say art has to be painted on a canvas doesn't mean that a blank canvas isn't art in itself. And then you may sit there and go, you know, it was dumb when you started, but now I think the guy may be onto something. That whole thing then leaks into society. So as a philosophy, postmodernism rejects concepts of rationality. Check. Think about the world you live in when you read this. They're going to reject rationality. Nothing makes sense. They're going to reject objectivity. And they're going to reject universal truth. It emphasizes the diversity of human experience and the multiplicity of perspectives. Meaning, whatever you think is right. I like that, Pastor Pat. I think that is great. That way we can all get along. If everybody's opinion is the same, then we're good. I can see how this might catch on. I can see how this might happen. This is how you have pro-abortion Christians. What? And I don't mean to step on toes, and I know we're not supposed to talk about politics or religion when we go to Thanksgiving, but this ain't Thanksgiving, and some things just got to be said. You can't be pro-killing babies and be pro-Jesus. And I don't understand why that's a hang-up. Now listen, I understand that there's things outside of that. I understand stuff that happen. I don't think we got to be so dogmatic that we just burn the bridges with everybody. But at the core of who you are, you should be pro-life. And not pro-life in the political sense that we're going to grab flags and go march around and tell everybody how terrible they are. I mean pro-life in that you are for living things staying living. Because God is a God of the living. But you take postmodernism and you pour it into Christianity, and that's what you end up with. You end up with where everything gets watered down and changed. You get everything where, well, this is my opinion, and I don't understand why you're attacking my opinion. Why can't we just all coexist? The other problem with postmodernism is if you don't catch on it, it's subtle to it. It also creates what? Extreme isolation. We no longer have anything in common to bind ourselves together. Because your perspective is just as valid as my perspective, and I can't ever understand your perspective, and you can never understand my perspective because I'm me and you're you. You think that's not true? It's true all the time. We see it all over the world we live in now when we talk about race, when we talk about if you're male or female, when we talk about gender is non-binary, when you talk about these various things, all of that is from the place of, well, you can't understand what I'm going through because you're not that. But the truth of postmodernism isn't that we're now tribal and I have this with somebody else. What postmodernists teach is that the only thing that you can really know is what you know, and that thing that you know is only through your own lens, and because it's through your lens, it's not necessarily true. It's just what's true for you. If you can't see the darkness and the deception in that, I don't know what I can do for you. So when you start teaching the cross of Jesus and you start saying, hey, no, there is an absolute truth. You are created with purpose and design. We can put to death who we were and become who we are, which is children of the King bought with a price. You can be bound together as family. You can understand what somebody else is going through. You can bear the weight of somebody else's sin. You can bear the weight of somebody else's struggle. You can have sympathy and understanding. A postmodern world goes, I don't like that. Now, here's the dirty little secret about postmodernism. It's essentially an influence on our society, but it's not the underlying philosophy. The underlying philosophy that drives who we are is tribalism. See, we're postmodern. Pastor Pat, now you're just making words up. Tribalism is the idea we're going to find people who are close enough to my individual perspective, and then I'm going to align myself with them, and then my tribe is right and your tribe is wrong, to the place that we're not going to communicate anymore. We're going to go to war. We're going to go to war. We're not going to see eye to eye. We're not going to communicate. I don't care what you think. We have established in our tribe why we are right and why you are wrong. And if you're of the other tribe, you should die. You should die. You should not get a voice. You should be silenced. You should be doxxed. We got to get you off the... And then what is weird in the world we live in, without pointing fingers at anybody, all the tribes do that. It's not just like one side, like, oh, we're the victims. That ain't true. So then if we're supposed to be good and loving and understanding and created in the image of God, and we have a purpose and we have a design, and God wants us not to be selfish, wants us to think about other people, wants us to build our society around that, tribalism doesn't really fit into it. Because you can't really be like, we're going to just murder everybody who doesn't see the way we do. In fact, Jesus says to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And if they hit you in the cheek, turn your head and let you hit the other side. I do not like this Jesus. That doesn't play in the world. We've got to fight for what's right. We've got to stand against oppression. You don't understand the cross. You don't understand the thing that we are talking about and what we're looking at today. Jesus and what he did has already won the fight you're wanting to have. We aren't living in a world where we're flipping a coin to see who's going to win when it's all said and done. Christ has already won. And then Christ taught, I'm going to separate out the good from the bad when the whole thing's done. But your job is to go into the world and teach what I taught and disciple people and help them understand. Because Jesus knew we'd end up here. He knew that mankind left to themselves is going to descend into weird tribalism, and they're going to argue about things that I've already given answers to. That's why when you read this text, it says that the Greeks demand wisdom. The Jews want signs. He knows. The Greeks loved the idea of how smart they are. We're so smart. When Paul goes to Athens, and he teaches in Athens like we did when we went through the book of Acts, and he says, I want to talk to you about the God that you've put as the unknown God, and then he starts to dissect the Stoics and the philosophers of the age, that shows you their heart. The Greeks love to think how smart they are, which is tribalism. Because, see, the idea of tribalism isn't, we don't just go, maybe my idea is right. We go, no, my idea is right, and if you don't understand my idea, then you're stupid. I'm so smart. I'm so ahead of you because I have figured all of this out, and you haven't because you're dumb. And you go, well, what about postmodern? What happened to we can all have our own views, and if I want to see the world that we're all a bunch of oranges sitting in a bowl, then that's okay because it's just for me. No, we're not doing that anymore. You got to go find other people who think they're oranges, and then you guys can develop a tribe, and if you can get that, then God bless you. But otherwise, no, you need to figure out which tribe you're going to join and be a part of. And in the midst of all of that, we exist. So when Paul writes, we preach Christ crucified as a stumbling block to Jews and as folly to Gentiles, that's true. Well, why is it a stumbling block to Jews? They don't want a crucified king. They want a Messiah who will come and rule their tribe. Come stand over the top of us. Come rule out of Jerusalem. Come overthrow the Roman government. Come make us the big bads on the block. Come show everybody why we're right. That's what we need. And Jesus shows up, born to a virgin girl in a town nobody's supposed to go to, preaches a message that none of them like, goes to death on a cross, which by Jewish tradition was if you died hanging on a tree, you were cursed. And then he's supposed to be their Messiah? They're like, well, this is a real stumbling block. I have a real hard time with this. Now, the interesting thing in that language is that the stumbling block is because they don't know what to do with what? The resurrection. When Paul writes it's a stumbling block to the Jews, the implication is Jesus has done something that should imply he is the Messiah, but the thing we want the Messiah to be, he didn't do. So now we have something we're tripping over, something we're hung up on, because it doesn't seem that everything we want to line up is lining up, but some things are, which was the resurrection. And the Greeks just thought it was stupid. Because the Greeks, at the end of the day, they're closet humanists. Now, humanist is this. You believe that man is the measure of all things, and left to our own devices, we will pull ourselves up by bootstraps, and we will create utopian society. This was really popular in the world post-Enlightenment, pre-World War I. And then World War I happened, and men died in trenches. And then World War II happened, and the Holocaust. Whoops. Then you have the killing fields, and then you have Vietnam, and then you have skirmish after skirmish after skirmish until today we're still skirmishing. So where's it at? Where's that idea? But the Greeks really believed, we've figured it out. We understand democracy. We know what's good. We know what's right. We've got this all solved. We know how to live and how to act. So when you would go to them and say, actually, you don't, and the only way that you can find redemption is the cross of Jesus Christ, they were like, well, that's dumb because we didn't think of it. We thought up how good to live. It's the nature of humanity. And the truth of the matter is at the bottom of all of that, pride. The bottom of that is pride. And pride is the root of all sin. At the bottom of every worldview that doesn't focus itself on the God who created you is pride. It's the idea that I don't need a God to tell me how to live, and I can figure out how to live better. So God may have worked at a time, but now that time's passed, and now we're all smart, we're all civilized, we're all technology-driven. What happened then can't relate to now. I got it figured out. I don't need that. Which is why he writes, it makes the foolish feel wise. And then you may be sitting there and you go, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to interact with that? You know, like the church loves apologetics, which is the study of how do I interact with a worldview that isn't Christian and come up with answers for things. But then the problem is sometimes that can go so far down the road of intellectualism that you miss the point of the cross. You miss the spiritual aspects of it. I had a debate. I sat on stage with the unbeliever, and I said a lot of believery things. And when it was all said and done, they said, you won the debate. Oh, cool, so the unbeliever's a believer now? Oh, no, I made him look stupid. I made him look stupid with my large words. Isn't that tribalism? Like, don't let the enemy trick you. You can slap Christian on just about anything, and it doesn't actually mean that it's Christian. And if your point isn't to advance the gospel, and if your point isn't to help somebody understand who Jesus is, but your point is to try to discredit someone and make them look stupid, you're not loving your enemies, you're being an enemy. And it's not what God intended. So you got to be mindful of that. And then when you really look at Scripture, God doesn't pick smart people. Pastor Pat, you be careful, because he picked me. Right. Right, you think I'm kidding? Look at the text today. This text is hilarious. God chose, this is verse 27, what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. Wait a minute, Paul. Let me reword it so you understand. God picked you because you're dumb, to shame people who are smart. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose you because you have no power. You're powerless. And you're going to shame the things in this world that think they have power. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being may boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the world. God picks the dumb, the powerless, and the useless. And he picks those to show that he's full of power, that he's full of wisdom, and that he's useful. Well, how does that work? Well, stay with me this morning. Each and every one of you in this room has a reputation. I do not. Yes, you do. Some reputations are worse than other reputations. We're all sinners in the eyes of God, Pastor Pat. Be careful. I'm not saying that. I'm saying outside of here. There's things outside of here that are worse in the eyes of the world than other things. That's just the nature of human beings. There are oppressors, there are victims, okay? Now, if you are that thing and your reputation is not good, if people are like, they are a swindler, they are evil, they're not faithful to their spouse, they're creepy, they say mean things, they've been hurtful, they've been in jail, they're drug addicts, they're alcoholics, these are not good people. If that's the identity that you have out there, and then the cross calls you out of that darkness and drags your broken frame back to here, it's a testament to the power and the word of the cross, because what happens is you are that thing. Nobody wants to talk about it. Christianity supports the idea that you can't change who you are. That is true. If you could, there'd be no need for what? The cross. There'd be no need for Jesus. There'd be no need for retribution and redemption and sanctification and righteousness by proxy. None of that would be necessary because you could just fix yourself. But at the end of the day, no matter how good you do, it doesn't make up for the bad that you were. And the scars that you left and the brokenness that you left, that's always a part of who you are, except in the confines of Jesus. Now, if you bring that broken mess to the cross of Jesus Christ, and you take all of it, not some of it, not just the parts you don't like, not just the things that you're like, well, these things I can give up, but this thing's really important. Christ says, bring it all to me, put to death yourself, and take up my cross and come after me, and I will make you what? Righteous. Well, how does he make you righteous? He puts a little bit of himself in you. He puts the mind of Christ in your broken brain. So you still got that sin brain. You still got the like, let's do it, feels good. But you also have a good and loving God who goes, no! Learn the word no. We're not doing that. You have purpose and you have meaning and there's freedom from it. And the testament to the world outside of this is when you walk out of here, you're still what you were. The world still sees you as an addict. The world still sees you as a philanderer. The world still sees you as a swindler, an evil, liar. They see those things. But secret is you're not. Now you're Jesus. You got Christ inside of you. You're righteous. You are full of right. What you do is inherently right because Christ lives in you. Well, what if I sin? Then ask for forgiveness, but it doesn't change that Jesus is still in your heart, redefining who you are. And furthermore, you're called. That's sanctified. That's what that means. You are called out. You are made sacred. Because why? Because Jesus is living in you. Because he died and resurrected on the cross and brought freedom from sin and spread wide the doors of heaven so that we can march through and know the God who created us. You are no longer what you were. You are what you are, which is a bearer of the cross of Jesus Christ. You are sanctified and set free from what you were. And you're going to take that back out to the world that thinks you're an addict and a mess. And then when you go and do that, you're redeemed. You're redeemed. Now, redemption is a word we don't talk a lot about. Redeem literally means to free from captivity by the order of payment of ransom. You have been redeemed. Every time you go into Menards, what are they? Every time, and I don't understand Menards, and I know that you're going, what are you talking about right now? You're supposed to be landing the plane. Buckle in. Every time you go into Menards, they got that dumb sign that says 11% rebate on whatever you buy. Redeem at the front desk. And you're like, why don't you just make everything 11% cheaper? Then I don't have to jump through. What is this weird hoop I'm jumping through? But that's redeemed. To take something and turn it in to get something back, to pay the price of the thing. Christ paid your price. All of the condemnation and the guilt, all the pain and hurt you've caused, all the things you've done in the world, the way the world views you, Jesus took that upon himself. He's like, I'm going to bear all that for you. They're not going to bully you, they're going to bully me. They're not going to define you, they're going to define me. They're not going to attack you, they're going to attack me. You have been redeemed. You have been bought with a ransom. Well, what's the ransom? The cross. The cross of Jesus Christ is the ransom for your soul. So why did God pick a bunch of derelict, weirdo sinners? Because that's what the world's going to know you as. And when you come out of here, and when you march back into the world as a redefined, changed thing, when you become a new thing, the world looks at you and goes, man, I knew them in the day, but I can't believe who they are now. And then you know what you get to say? Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. It ain't me, it's he who lives in me. Every time I run into anybody from high school, and I go, what do they go? What do you do? I'm pastoring a church. I wish I could take pictures of people's faces and put them up. You do what? I had a teacher tell me the last time that I talked to him, which has been 10, 15 years. He goes, well, I always knew you'd do one of two things. You'd either be in prison or you'd be preaching. I'm like, hey, listen, you may hear it and go, oh, well, that's not very nice. That's all of us. You either are in bondage of sin, condemned to death, or you're a child of the King bought with a price. That's where we're at. And so that's why when the world looks at it and goes, I don't like this thing. I don't like what you're doing. I don't like there's no progression. I don't like that it's just open to all of us. You get to go, I don't care what you like because I've seen it work. I know what happens, and I've seen God work, and I've seen the power and the authority of cross on display in people's lives. So if you're sitting there this morning as some sort of skeptic where you go, well, I don't know if God will this, or I don't know if God will that, what he's saying to you and calling to you is to come out of the darkness you're living in, step into the light of the cross, and be set free once and for all from the bondage of sin that the enemy has put over you. That enemy wants you to die, wants you to march into oblivion, wants you isolated, alone, depressed, full of anxiety. Christ wants you a part of the body. Christ wants you a part of what he's done. Christ wants you home. So if you're an addict, the cross. You're going to get divorced, the cross. Your kids are a mess, the cross. You can't figure out how to be honest in your job, the cross. You can't stop gossiping, the cross. All of these things that seem to be what you're defining yourself by, that you can't find freedom from, that freedom is available to you at the cross of Jesus Christ, and the only thing keeping you from it is yourself. God has called all of you to come to him. We decide whether we will accept that or reject that. And if you're sitting there with your feathers ruffled or you're frustrated because you're like, well, I don't know if I believe with all some things I don't. Listen, you can feel that way. Paul literally approached it. You will think the things of Jesus are stupid. But if you feel that way, then think who you're aligning with. The world. I just don't know how a rational, sane person can look at the world that we live in, can watch the news that we can watch, that can see the things that go on outside of these walls and say, that is a better option than to follow a God who says everybody is created with purpose and design. No one is better than anybody else. The rich should take care of the poor. We should love those who are unlovable. We should reach for those who can't be reached. We should put roofs over people who don't have roofs. We should feed people who don't have food. And then we should introduce those people to a God who loves them, who has purpose and design for them. If you can look at that and go, that's a society that I want to be a part of, then by all means, when we go into worship, get your happy self up and march it down to the foot of the cross. Put your sin down, put your greed down, your pride down, the idea that you've got it figured out down, and take up the mantle of Jesus Christ and come after him. I am tired of living in a world that in one breath is unhappy and upset with the way things are, and then in the other hand refuses to accept a God who had a plan. So I can't fix that, but I can preach it here. And so what I'm calling to you, Vintage Church, is this. Get your sinner friends here. Get them here. Get them here on Wednesdays. Get them here on Sundays. Talk to them about your faith. Make what is real, real. You ain't got to talk about other churches. You ain't got to talk about other things. You just have to be honest about who Christ is to you. Because we have a whole world that needs Jesus, and the only Jesus they may see is you. And if you're here this morning and you don't know Jesus, now's the time. Uh-oh, Pastor Pat, are you going to do that thing where you make me raise my hand and stand up and everybody's going to look at me and then I got to repeat a prayer after you because I don't do well talking in front of people? No. In fact, I don't think you have to do that to meet Jesus. Sacrilege, says the Christians in the room. You want to meet Jesus? You just met him. You want to be like Christ? Be like Christ. You want to be different than what you are? Be different. You don't want to be the thing the world says you are? You're not. You've already been bought for the price. You've already been purchased. You just have to believe. So if you want to meet Jesus, believe. Believe you don't have to be the thing you are. You can be a new thing in him. And then, here's something you won't hear a lot of people say, but it's the truth. Test it. We're not supposed to test the Lord. You can test this. I don't mean test it to be like, God doesn't love me. But you can say, I'm a new thing, and I'm pursuing Jesus. And I'm going to put Christ in my life, and I'm going to have faith what he says is real. Guess what? You do that, it'll be real. I know more people in Christianity that the world threw the towel in on, that Christ saw fit to call out of the darkness they were living in, that are radically different people, completely changed by the power of Jesus because they saw fit to not be defined by what somebody said about them and saw fit to be defined by Christ. So we'll be a church that facilitates that. We'll be the hands and feet to broken people. So if you're lost, you don't have to be lost anymore. When we go into worship, you got plenty of opportunity to come back down here and get it right. You want to come down to the altar, you want to confess, you can do that. You want to sit in your seat because you don't want people to know you're a mess, that's fine too. God knows your heart, just pray it right where you're at. But what I would say to you is take communion. I don't know what communion is. There's a card in front of you to explain it. Communion is a recognition of the cross of Jesus Christ. That bread represents the body that was broken on it. That grape juice represents the blood that was shed for you. So if you're going to get yourself right this morning with Jesus, you're going to get yourself into a place that you're going to call yourself Christian and start walking that way, then piddle yourself back to that communion table, pick that stuff up, say a little prayer, take the card, use the card that's in the seat in front of you to walk you through it the first time, take the prayer, and then from this day forward, you're His. Well, what about? There is no what abouts. We're going to deal with resurrection first. Do you believe that or not? Then once you believe that, then we'll start dealing with your behavior issues. Your behavior issues aren't going to change because you modify them. Your behavior issues are going to change because you have the mind of Christ in your head. We are a church that believes you can be different than you were. Let's be that church. Let's pray. Lord, I come to you and I thank you for each and every person in this room. Lord, I thank you for the heart and passion that we all have for you. Lord, I thank you for every lost person who is here today. Every skeptic, every person who is wondering whether or not they should believe or they shouldn't believe, every person struggling with who they are in you, looking for identity issues, trying to figure things out. Lord, I pray for that person right now. First and foremost, I pray you would silence their brain. You would lower all the noise, all the garbage they've listened to, all the things they've heard, and you would open their mind to the clarity of the cross. You would reveal who you are, the simple truth that you came and you died and you resurrected so that we can be free from the identity that the world has given us. Lord, for believers in this room, I pray you would wake them up in the middle of the night for their lost friends and family. Lord, you would give them ample opportunity to share your cross with those people. Lord, I pray you would use this church to help facilitate reaching people. Lord, I pray that you would raise up pastors and ministers inside of this church. People who love people, who want them to know the power of the cross. And then, Lord, I pray for Vintage. No matter what we do, no matter where we go, no matter what we say, who we are, what thing we take on, whatever you lead us to do, that at the forefront of what it is we do is the cross of Jesus Christ. Raised high over a city lost in darkness. Lord, I pray that cross would shine to all those who have condemned themselves, all those who are in bondage of sin, all those who are locked in the prison that is this world. Lord, help us to raise that cross and dig through all the noise and get your message out that there is freedom for a sinner come home. Lord, I pray you would use us to reach people who are lost. We're not looking to draw more Christian people, Lord. We are looking for the sinners and the broken and the disenfranchised in this world. Lord, send those people to us. And then use us, Lord, to be the bearer of your cross. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Pat, for